Welcome back to another week of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, flying solo for both the Raw recap and the SmackDown summary that we'll have upcoming later this afternoon. Earlier this week, however, we did touch on the upcoming All In pay-per-view that takes place on Saturday. My co-host Justin Lowry was able to give his thoughts, and we discussed the implications of the show. So if you want to check that out, we already have it up on our YouTube channel. You can go and revisit that, watch that. It's also linked on our Twitter account, which you could follow at 5-Star Pod Wrestle. But let's jump back into Monday Night Raw and WWE and talk about the biggest takeaways from this past week's show. And they were pretty significant. It was a Raw that I think will have long-standing ramifications with how it ended. And let's waste no further time. It is the turn that people did not expect. Braun Strowman, now seemingly the top heel on the Monday Night brand, as he turns on Roman Reigns and the entire Shield, Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins, at the conclusion of the show. And as you see in the photo there, he's joined by Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre. Just to kind of recap how this one unfolded, really it was a sort of a unique setup where Roman and Braun were already announced as opponents at the upcoming HIAC pay-per-view, going for the Universal Championship, as Strowman is using his Money in the Bank contract to cash in at that event. So they already had that set up, but as we see many, many times over the years, it's always two future opponents serving as teammates, and sometimes it works out, usually it doesn't. This was another case where it did not work out. Roman had wrestled pretty much the entire match in the tag team bout against Ziggler and McIntyre. And then finally, with the crowd really chanting for him to come into the ring, Braun Strowman does enter as he got the tag. But instead of coming in and attacking and taking out Ziggler and McIntyre, he kind of just stopped, looked at Roman Reigns, and eventually he joined the other two in a beatdown of the big dog. And eventually this led to Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose, the other members of the Shield, coming out. That was really needed because Roman, more times than not, gets the heel reaction, the negative reaction from the fans. So initially, I think they were, not too upset that Braun Strowman was attacking Roman Reigns, even though it clearly was an indication of a heel turn. But then when Braun took out the other members of the Shield, you sort of got that eerie silence where the fans who had loved this guy so much over the past, about a year and a half, really didn't know how to react. No one saw this coming. People had speculated maybe at some point Roman Reigns would turn heel, or more likely Dean Ambrose. Instead, it was the mountain of a man in Braun Strowman, Mr. Monster in the Bank, as he's also known. And this seems very bizarre how they handled this, because really this was a guy that I think the term is organically got over with the fans. He was supposed to be a heel all along, going back to his original feud with Roman Reigns, but he just became so popular and such a larger-than-life character that fans got behind him. They turned him face, and he's been a very impressive face that's gotten a great reaction, and you could argue maybe the top reaction in all of Monday Night Raw. And it almost seems like this is their latest plan to try to once again get Roman a babyface reaction with the crowd. I don't think it's going to work. It seems like they're really going out of their way to get a big villain to put in front of Roman Reigns. They did it with Brock Lesnar, and to some extent it worked with Roman getting cheered. But in this case, I think they had something good in Braun Strowman as a face. They went away from it. So now it's going to be Braun as a heel against Roman as a face, and will not be surprised if that backfires with the fans really giving the opposite reaction that perhaps the company is intending. So now you look at Braun Strowman, and he's already a massive star. Now he's probably even bigger because he's undeniably the top heel on Monday night. So it could help him in that regard. It's just sort of bizarre that they changed really midstream with him seemingly being potentially a possible babyface champion. It seemed like that was going to be the eventual outcome once he won Money in the Bank. Now you have to wonder if he's going to win the title, and if he does, certainly will not be as a babyface. That was not the only takeaway from Monday Night Raw that involved a member of the Shield, however, as I think probably the best content in terms of a match on Monday night went to Seth Rollins and his challenger for the Intercontinental title. It was a home country hero as Raw took place in Toronto, Canada. Kevin Owens, who had not been seen since he was really demolished by Braun Strowman at SummerSlam. Owens comes out. The fans love him. He cut a promo about Sami Zayn and then tried to get some of the fans riled up by saying, Toronto's not his favorite part of Canada. Nonetheless, he and Rollins put on an absolute classic match. They pulled out all the stops. KO was able to show off some of the moves that we have not seen from him in quite some time. Certainly not in his feud against Braun Strowman. So he goes in there, has a great match, comes up short, no surprise there. Rollins retains the Intercontinental title after what's probably about a 20-plus minute classic. The biggest notable happening, however, took place after the match. Kevin Owens, after they went to commercial break, came back, was still sitting in the ring, and then ultimately, after really just agonizing over what had happened, says simply, "I quit," walks off. So it'll be interesting to see what they do now with Kevin Owens. I don't know if maybe potentially there's a real-life injury that necessitates him taking a break from TV, or if this is just the next step in a storyline for him. Either way, he's not obviously legitimately quitting the company, but this could be certainly much needed for Owens because he's been on the wrong side of a couple of squash matches recently, including the one I mentioned against Braun Strowman. So maybe a way to reset his character, bring him back in a different capacity. We'll see, but I hope and I pray that they find something important for Kevin Owens to do, not just short term, but for the long term. This guy was a former world champion. I think he's one of the best workers. He's been durable. He's taken bumps that really hardly anyone else in the company is willing to take. So I think he deserves to be rewarded. We'll see what happens from this, but it's certainly going to have a lot of the fans curious to tune in and see if we do get Kevin Owens back anytime soon, or what exactly will happen with that. So I thought that was noteworthy. A match that we have seen many, many, many times, and I don't think anyone wanted to see it again, is Baron Corbin and Finn Balor, but that's exactly, unfortunately, what we got on Monday night. And this was really playing up the fact that formerly Constable Corbin, now acting general manager of Raw, Baron Corbin, is drunk with power, if you will. He can not only make the matches now, but without Kurt Angle to really stop him, he can get away with a lot more. So they have him and Finn wrestle once again. I think it's probably the fourth time that we've seen this match. And Finn Balor had the upper hand. Corbin, sensing that, grabs a chair, goes out and attacks Finn Balor, forcing the ref to ring the bell and DQ the former Constable. However, this is where they really play up the storyline that Corbin's out of control with power. He says, oh, it actually is a no DQ match, restart it. Uses the chair to take out Finn Balor and then gets a pinfall victory over him. I get what they're doing with Corbin. I'm fine with that aspect of it, but it should not have come at the expense of Finn Balor, because Finn Balor really was a guy who needed to get some momentum, needed to get elevated a little bit, and I thought that happened over the past couple weeks. At SummerSlam, he came back as the Demon. Very big surprise, long overdue. Got a great reaction, one of the biggest reactions of the entire night. He made short work of Corbin. Seemingly then he can move on to bigger and better things. He had a Universal Championship match, again long overdue, against Roman Reigns the following night. Very competitive match in which, even though he lost, I think he grew in the eyes of some of the fans. So, you do these 2 weeks, back-to-back nights actually, where you really make Finn look like a star, and then you sort of take it all away with have him losing to Corbin. And I don't know if they continue with this. People I don't think want to see this feud whatsoever continue. But the way it finished up, either Finn Balor is going to move on to something that's probably not a real marquee storyline after that, or they're going to continue with this and him and Corbin going at it even further. So not a fan of how that turned out. Nonetheless, again, it is good for Corbin. There's no denying that he's certainly improved in his time on Raw. He's now a character as opposed to just a guy that went out there and wrestled, decent matches. Now he brings some interest in terms of his promos, stuff like that. He is getting better at it. I think he's slowly being able to pull off this new character, this authority figure. Although that is tiresome in its own right. We've seen so many times the heel authority figure, And really, with Kurt Angle and Paige running Raw and SmackDown respectively, it felt like a breath of fresh air. Stephanie and Triple H aren't around very often. Shane McMahon hasn't been seen, but when he is around, he doesn't really interfere too much, and he's a face. But potentially now with Kurt Angle out of the picture, you go right back to that tried and true formula of the heel authority figure in the form of Baron Corbin. The difference is he also steps in the ring on a pretty regular basis. So we'll see where they go with Corbin. More importantly, I think we'll see where they go with Finn Balor from here. But I thought that was a major step back for Finn on Monday. And to me, while it certainly was not a match, probably the most entertaining part of Monday Night Raw came in the form of Elias' segment. And Elias, if you've been tuning into the show, you know he is, really someone that we think very highly of on Monday night. He was interrupted by none other than Toronto's own Trish Stratus, the Hall of Famer, perhaps one of the most legendary females in WWE history. So it starts with Elias coming out, running down the city of Toronto, as he does pretty much any place he is. And Trish, in her hometown, says, I'm a fan of yours, I like your music, so on and so forth, but I'm not going to allow you to run down the good name of the city of Toronto. And they have a pretty good verbal exchange, and Elias just kept cutting into her some really good jabs, just really entertaining stuff. And again, he continues to excel. Even when he's not wrestling, he goes out there and entertains the fans with whether it be his songs, his verbal jabs, as I mentioned, in this case here with Trish Stratus. I thought it was very good. Now, what does it mean long term? Probably nothing. I don't think we're going to see anything continue with this. Probably a one-off for Trish until she comes back and wrestles at Evolution. Although it is good in that sense to get her back in front of the audience, especially the fans that might not have been around when she was a champion about a decade ago. But for Elias, seems like more times than not, he comes out, he sings a song, maybe wrestles a quick match against a guy like a Kurt Hawkins, but he doesn't have those consistent long-running feuds. And it seems at this point that they've sort of given up on the Elias-Bobby Lashley feud, which they never really got their big match. Thought it was going to happen in SummerSlam. It did not. So where does Elias go from here? That remains to be seen, but there's really no doubt that Elias continues to be one of the bright spots each and every week. And once again, I mentioned his verbal jabs, his insults of Trish Stratus. I thought his punchline at the end, right before he got slapped, in which he said to Trish, I'm not interested in women in their 60s. And Trish, I believe, is just beyond 40 years old, I think 41, 42. That is something that as soon as he said it, that was like, oh my gosh moment. I can't believe he just said that. And that's something that I think Raw sorely needs. So he provides that, but certainly the hope is that sooner rather than later, he gets into a prominent storyline. And, I think that's a guy that you're probably not going to have him main eventing a pay-per-view, but he should be a guy in one of the 4 or 5 biggest matches in a pay-per-view. So we'll see if they come up with something for him for the upcoming HIAC event. But for the time being, it looks like it's all going to be about the Shield and Braun Strowman and maybe his short-term alliance potentially with Dolph Ziggler and Drew McIntyre. So again, you get one of the biggest stars in the entire company turning from face to heel on Monday night. Braun Strowman, now a heel monster who will be challenging for the Universal title. That's the biggest takeaway from Monday night overall. I thought it was a decent show and certainly very newsworthy as far as the conclusion of it as well. That's going to do it for the Raw recap, but stick around. We'll be back with the SmackDown summary. That's upcoming next. It's right here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.